Let's go ahead and get started. I'm happy to introduce our first speaker, Tim Brown from Prove. Tim, please.
Yeah, thank you. You didn't tell me I was going to get rated. No. Okay, how do I do this? The clicker here. Just hit the green arrow forward to move it? Okay. All right. How's everybody doing? Wow, it's bright. I'm Tim Brown. I am the Chief Identity Officer at Prove Identity. I've been in the identity and biometrics industry for about 28 years now, going back into the mid-90s. I worked for a fingerprint company in Tampa, joined up part of the Idemia growth phase back in after 9/11. During that time, I've led biometric initiatives, variety of different digital identity initiatives and things like that. I was the author of short-lived human authentication API that kind of merged up into Bio API, and I've been was an active participant, I should say, in a lot of the NIST and IEC biometric standards that were going, ISO standards that were going on. Hold multiple patents in multi-factor authentication as well as biometrics, and basically my job at Prove is to talk about sort of Horizon 2 and Horizon 3 initiatives in the identity space. One thing you should know about me is I did not play for the Oakland Raiders and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I am not a football player. He's a little bit taller than I am, but we share the same name. So I'm going to talk about selfie capture, but I'm going to talk about it in the context of identity verification onboarding, because I think for a lot of us, we will encounter this type of flow on a routine basis when we're onboarding. And I think a lot of the focus that's been going on right now with AI and AI attacks and injection attacks have largely been looking at attacking this kind of flow as you're onboarding into your bank account. This should be pretty straightforward for everybody to remember. We've seen it before. You get a text message that says, hey, we want to onboard you into your bank account. Click this link, you click it. It takes you to capturing a driver's license and then a selfie, and matches that selfie to the document. And if all goes well, you have a green check mark and you're onboarded into your application, into your bank account or whatever it is. So what's the problem here? So there's a lot of escalating threats that are going on relative to both sides of the equation in this. So you've got a lot of AI attacks, stolen credentials, fake credentials, things like that. For driver's licenses, as well as challenges with driver's licenses in general and capturing them. But on the selfie side, capture side, you have a well-documented attacks recently. Like last summer, there was the paper that was written about injection attacks, synthetic images, masks, deep fakes. It was about a month ago. I was at FedID, participated in a panel and talked about AI and the surge of tools and things that were going to be attacking us and allowing fraudsters to perpetuate fraud at a much higher scale quickly. And this is one of those ways. My family has a code word that we shared to make sure that if I call to my kids or they call me saying, hey, I need money, they better give me the code word or they're not getting any money from me. So what happens here? You've got, but why are we doing these things? So these things end up causing more R&D work because you have an ever-escalating war on fraud. You've got new attacks, you're flashing lights, you're doing these things, you're asking a person to turn their head and cough, you're stand on one foot while they're doing these captures, these types of things. That ends up introducing a lot more user friction. From a revenue side, that means more drop-offs for onboarding and less revenue. So why is that? It's because the capture device is not secure. So if you spend any time with a lot of the liveness vendors, that'll be the first thing they'll say. They'll say, you know what? The phone is not a secure device because we don't know who it's issued to. But it's also related to the fact that we think about the steps during identity verification onboarding atomically. So we think about capturing a document. We think about actually first sending a text message, then we think about capturing a document, and is it a live document? How do I help the user get through that flow? Then we think about capturing the face image. So there's a lot of money, time, and energy spent, fighting this war on fraud. But what I like to talk about, and which is sort of near and dear to the work that I do, is what if you could ensure the security of the device for most use cases? And by doing that, you're contemplating the whole of the identity verification flow, not just those individual parts. And in doing that, you can improve your customer experience, reduce fraud, and increase your revenues because you're having less drop-offs due to the amount of friction that's being introduced. So this is one of my favorite memes. So, yeah, okay, so this is a silly thing, but we think about these things atomically, and that ignores a fundamental truth, right? So I'm capturing I'm a cardholder's driver's license, and I'm capturing a selfie of I'm a cardholder. But we know we're supposed to be onboarding I'm a cardholder, right? So if I'm capturing a driver's license for somebody that's asserting their identity, it's on the driver's license saying that this is who it's supposed to be. Typically, we look at that and go, well, we got to prove that this driver's license is authentic. And we end up just treating this data as form fill. But could this data actually be used to help secure the transaction? And the answer is absolutely yes. There's my help. So the question is simple: is this I'm a cardholder's phone? And yes, you trust the capture device. And if no, you don't trust the capture device. Now we approve. Do a lot in this space, and so that we kind of come at this in an interesting way from an identity verification perspective. But we are able to look at this and say, listen, if we know we're onboarding IMA's phone, or we know we're onboarding IMA, we've got a driver's license, I'm going to detect I'm going to detect the phone number, make sure it's coming from an indisputable source, right? I'm going to evaluate the trustworthiness of the device because a lot of the arguments that I'll hear is, well, what about SIM change or SIM swaps, or what about somebody steals this phone, those types of things, or I lose my phone. We'll evaluate the trustworthiness of the device, and then we'll confirm across the multiple sources, data sources, that phone actually does, or that phone number, now that we've confirmed that it exists, that it's what we think it is, we're sure that it hasn't been SIM swapped, we'll confirm that it belongs to IMA. So you're telling me there's a chance, right? So, okay. We have a pretty snappy way of thinking about this at Prove. We call it possession, reputation, ownership, or PRO. But basically, we check that IMA, or in this case, Jay, is physically holding the phone. So when I was recently in Paris, I used my phone there. It works, right? The phone authenticates itself against with the MNOs and the cell towers. It just works. There's no fumbling with, okay, I've got to authenticate this, I got to change currencies, I got to do all these things. The phone, the way that mobile networks are set up is they just work wherever you go. And that happens because of your SIM card. You got a SIM in your phone, it authenticates itself directly to the mobile operators. And if you're able to do that authentication, you know that phone is the number that's coming from. Here in the US, you can actually, with consent obviously, ask the mobile operators to report back the phone number that's coming back from that's hitting the cell tower, and it'll come back and give you that phone number. Elsewhere in the world, you enter the phone number and you ping it against the MNOs, and it'll confirm that phone number is exactly the number you expect it to be. So at that point, you prove that the phone is in the possession of this person and is that phone number. Reputation comes along, then you want to look at a bunch of different signals and think, okay, I can look at, is this a SIM swap? When was the last port dates? Has there been any disconnects? What's the tenure on the phone? A bunch of information can come together and help you kind of score that and then get an idea of whether that should be trusted. We have a sliding scale of trust that we work with. Once it's over a certain threshold, we go ahead and say, okay, good, this is actually trustworthy. And then finally, we know we've got the phone number, we know it's trustworthy, and the device is trustworthy. Does that phone number belong to Jay or IMA in our example? We bounce it against a number of different sources, not the least of which is the mobile operators, but also a lot of bank-grade data sources to say, yep, this is the phone number that Jay uses whenever he's interacting with us. And through that, we're able to go through and say, okay, we can do that. Now, I've got some slides that'll walk through what this looks like. So, possession is 9/10 of the law. So this is, first thing we do is establish possession. Like I said, we'll use mobile or silent authentication, or we also do enriched links, or worst case, you can do SMS OTP. You can measure the trust score of the device figure out, do this calculation, look at behavioral risk as well. You can put a bunch of different types of signals into here. Is the person typing with it? Look for SIM changes, line types, port dates. I mean, if it's supposed to be a mobile phone, is it actually a mobile phone? Is it a mobile phone that's on a one of these SMS banks that are out on the internet where you can go ahead and start, just use these phone numbers and see the OTPs coming through? That type of information kind of funnels into this overall risk score that's there. And then finally, use the PII from the document that was presented, and then make sure that you're confirming the ownership. So I'm looking at IMA's information, and I'm sending it against multiple sources to do a verification, which is pretty standard, right? A lot of identity verification with KYC platforms will do this. So, whoops, I went backwards. Look at that. Sorry. So how does this change the calculus? Well, initially, when I first received this text message, and I tapped that link, I've essentially gone through the possession and reputation checks. So I'm now telling you that I've got Tim's phone number. It's 555-1212, or IMA's number. And I checked it, and we've got a really high trust score because she didn't go out and get the new iPhone 15, or she's had the same phone number for 20 years. All these things kind of factor in. Then I capture the document, and I pull the data from the document. Now this is interesting because I don't necessarily have to do a full doc auth here. I can just get the data from it, but I know it's regulatory compliance and things like that will ask for full doc auth. So we can do that. We pull the data from the machine readable on the back, and then compare it against our ownership sources. And if all goes well, you match the face from the selfie capture, and you've got your check. Now, in and of itself, it looks to be very similar. But what's interesting about this is I've secured the channel, right? I've said phone's in possession, and then you can start asking some interesting questions about that. If it's in possession of the consumer being onboarded, it's trusted, and it's their device, then you get to ask, why would the consumer fake their own document or selfie? And I'm sure there are some edge cases out there that could possibly do that, like first-person fraud and things like that. And if they aren't faking these, can I rely less on doc auth and liveness detection to be able to make this happen? Because we absolutely know that those technologies kill user experience and introduce friction. So anybody that's deployed one of these systems, and I'd say this because I came from a vendor that used to do that does document authentication. They'll talk about how great their service, how great it performs, and it's all well and good until you start to actually see real users actually interacting with it. And having seen a ton of the junk that's come through, people capturing when the document's on the ground, or it's in a wallet, that type of thing, or it's damaged beyond recognition, those types of things really add up and introduce a ton of consumer or friction that kills your user experience. And the net here is that with less user friction, less drop-off, more success rates mean increased revenue and onboarding success. Now, I get a lot of people that say, well, how does this actually work in real life? So Synchrony Bank's one of our customers. We've done about 50 million or so onboarding experiences into their credit cards. So Synchrony Bank, if you don't know them, they actually are responsible for Lowe's credit card, eBay credit card, things like that. So they are a branded credit card company. They use us for onboarding into their credit card application. If you show up at Lowe's and apply for a credit card and you use your mobile phone, you'll be using us. Notably, they don't use document authentication or selfie here. And in this flow, we see about 92% success rates. And our fraud rate is right around, let's see, at 92%, our fraud rate's right around 3.3 basis points of fraud, which is, if I do my math right, is like 0.033%, which is pretty amazing considering that a lot of document authentication companies, or when you add document authentication alone, the fraud rates tend to be pretty astronomical because they're relying heavily on, you can go buy a document and do these things, but if we're checking the ownership sources and doing what I'm talking about here, you could really drive this down. The nice thing about this is you can see we increased the pass rate of 20%. We increased their pass rate an additional 20% and made drive a lot of extra revenue to Synchrony and onboarded a lot more consumers this way. Interesting, there's Experian just rolled this out too for your credit reports, so you can actually use it there as well. So what's this all mean, right? I put this together and I was cognizant that I didn't want it to sound too much like I was selling Prove stuff, right? So obviously I'm a Prove employee, but I wanted to say, look, if I'm building an onboarding flow and I'm using document authentication and selfie matching and I'm getting targeted by these injection attacks and these different types of scaling AI attacks, as well as consumer friction, then I would think about how else can I use mobile intelligence, because this is really what we're talking about here, use mobile intelligence and account ownership to really improve your onboarding flows. Get a confirmed phone number, work with a company like ours or somebody else to be able to ask if that phone number belongs, or it's the expected phone number. Find out, you can go to the MNOs directly, you can go through us to say, hey, tell me about your, the SIM changes that have happened, look for some other signals, and then onboard the consumer and check the data sources to make sure it belongs to them. And that could even be a check against the DMV, right? To go out in the US, go out to ANVA, DLDV, and hit ANVA's data sources and make sure that that's the document you expect it to be. And I think if you do these things, you'll reduce fraud, user friction, and onboard more effectively. At least that's been our experience with the technology. So with that, I went through that pretty quickly, Andrew.
Let's do some Q&A.
Sure.
So I don't have a mic, so I'm going to stand there and ask you to scoot down a little bit.
Okay.
Again, as a reminder, if you want to ask questions, please add the session and put them in the app. So we have a couple, I screwed up the moderation for anyone at home, so you might see the questions already. There's one that says it's answered, it wasn't though, about regulatory considerations.
Sure.
So when you're working with massive amounts of data, regulated industry, telecom, like how's Prove looking at this? Are there any regulatory considerations for you and or for your customers?
Sure. I think the short answer is yes, there are, right? I think we take consent seriously.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we just talked about involves going against the MNOs and pulling data or asking them to provide data or bouncing data against them, and they'll only let you do it from consent-based perspective. What's kind of interesting is that we see a lot of use cases where we will use our onboarding and then a regulatory flow will kick in later on in the flow, like in gambling, online gambling and things like that. It's very similar. You onboard with something simple to get somebody into the app, and then you have regulations by state that say you have to capture a document, you have to do a document authentication. Having an ongoing conversation internally right now, because if you look at the NIST 863 spec, the way it's currently written, it talks about document capture, but it doesn't really talk about, it says appropriate technologies is the terminology they use about evaluating the document. It doesn't actually say you have to do document verification of some way, but it does talk about capturing a document because it's seen as a must-have in the space. And what I think, and a little side on that, what I think is really interesting about that is they'll talk about all the identity frameworks that are out there talk about identity and identity assurance in a way that's more is better, right? So more evidence is better. In a lot of cases, it makes sense. But what they fail to sort of address is how the performance of those different technologies actually compare up or match up. And I think, so from a regulatory perspective, really would like to see from a change perspective in regulations, I'd like to see it kind of evolving. I think, data storage, we anonymize all the data we have. We don't store PII, so a lot of that data that goes through, look, we sell to majority of the tier 1 banks in the US.
Yep.
Our customers, majority of the fintechs are our customers. You guys most likely, we process 90% of the adult population in a given year from an authentication and an onboarding experience perspective. And of course, as we get outside the US, you have different kind of regulatory landscapes that address this type of things.
So a customer could start with device-based, then if they need to, step up, strong word, but
we have
they need to add a dock-off component, they do it.
We have a customer in the gaming space that does exactly that.
Yeah.
So, for sure.
Let's see, it's pending question. What can companies do who don't have the means to pay for an Intel service for remote verification?
What can they do if they don't have
Yeah, maybe
the means?
they don't have the means to pay for Intel. Well, other ways of remote verification. You can pass too if you want.
That's an interesting question, right? I mean, I guess maybe that's a challenge because if you don't have the means for it, I mean, it's not just our technology that's it could potentially be cost prohibitive. It's, I will say that we're priced very competitively in the space. I'll say that, but happy to take that offline. But there's some things going on, right? I think like some of the there's some proposed legislation about in the U.S. trying to enable the U.S. postal system to be an identity verification provider, do that kind of onboarding. So in person is something that's out there. There are plenty of services out there, and one would hope that the post office would be price competitive.
That's super interesting conversation, actually. Here's one. So you talked about user friction. How's Prove looking at that? I mean, well, I'll add to this question.
Right.
We talk a lot about usability.
Sure.
And usability is the most important thing to drive adoption. Is Prove investing in that space, or do your own user testing, or is it just kind of intuitive? That less is more.
Well, we do. So I think there's some intuitiveness to it. But like I said, Synchrony is a great example. We fall back on them a lot because of the volume of transactions that they go through. And they provide us a bunch of feedback on how well things are performing. We have seen where customers who try to wire things together themselves without our guidance and help, some of the pass rates start to kind of waver. Which one of the things that we're investing heavily in right now is trying to standardize that flow to make it more orchestrated for customers to buy into and use. It's interesting because, I'm excited about going to some of the UX sessions that are here to talk about FIDO integration, because the other part of this too, we talk about this binding part of our flow. We talk about what we do as a binding flow, but really what we want to do at the end of this is issue a FIDO passkey at the end of it. And then that way, that's an analog to all the binding that's already occurred, and you keep reusing it wherever you go with that phone. But we've also run into some customers who complain about the FIDO onboarding or FIDO flows because they have seen it poorly implemented. And I think that goes without saying for all these things. So, but we try to engage we do engage our customers extensively to make sure that they're building what we consider to be best practices for it.
Very good. Well, look, Tim, that's all we have.
Okay.
So we're out of time.
Great.
So
if anybody wants to grab me on the side, it's fine.
All right.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.